Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Let's Chat About Aging in Your Community. I'm so happy to be able to be here today with a special guest that I'll introduce for in a minute as we look at yet another topic that's very important to being able to age well, healthy, and successfully in the community. Of course, our organization, CHATS, Community and Home Assistance to Seniors, is a local agency, and we will be addressing many local issues, but they do have national impact as well. And it's all about how do we support people to age with dignity and as much independence as possible and stay in their own communities as long as possible. Studies have shown that people do want to be able to live in their own homes and not in long term care facilities or to be able to stay out of hospital and emergency departments. And with the pressures on hospitals that we're all experiencing, that goal is very important to all of us. This podcast, as I said, is brought to you by CHATS, Community and Home Assistance to Seniors, and we provide many supports and programs to enable seniors, older adults, and their family caregivers to be able to thrive and live with dignity in their own communities. And to that end, I'm really happy to introduce our guest for today's program, Amy Coupal, who is the CEO, Chief Executive Officer of the Ontario Caregiver Organization. The organization is dedicated to ensure that caregivers have a voice in decision making and that they are actually embedded in the healthcare system, in the culture of healthcare, and a systems level approach. Amy has been with the organization for a number of years. She has over 20 years of experience in the not for profit sector and is very passionate about mobilizing change through knowledge exchange and building collaborative initiatives that positively impact the lives of individuals and communities. This work is so important, Amy, and we're delighted that you've agreed to spend some time talking with us about caregiving and the challenges, but also if we can talk about some of the opportunities that exist for caregivers. And first of all, just to start, can you tell us a little bit about your background? How did you get involved with the Ontario Caregiver Organization?
Well, this role really is a great opportunity for me to combine my personal and my professional experience. So, as you mentioned, I've been in the charitable and not for profit sector for most of my career and have had the opportunity to run organizations focused on a number of areas of need. But I also have an extensive amount of personal caregiving experience. So my brother had quadriplegic cerebral palsy, and I was a young caregiver for him throughout his lifetime. And then I was a caregiver for my mom through her cancer and palliative care journey. And now my dad is in his late 80s, and I'm a caregiver for him. So it's been really a big part of most of my life being a caregiver. And so it gives me the opportunity to draw from that personal experience and those diversity of experiences that I've had as a caregiver, and to be able to build this organization and really focus on improving the lives of all of the caregivers in Ontario has been an immense privilege.
Now, I saw a note somewhere that there are 4 million caregivers. Can you talk a little bit about that and who are they?
Well, what's interesting about that is when we launched our first program in late 2019, the estimation was 3.3 million caregivers in the province. And now that estimate is 4, and that's based on national data in terms of the growing number of caregivers. And certainly that aligns with changes in demographics, where we do see that the majority of caregivers are over the age of 65. So as we see those demographic trends evolving, then we see that changing. And so, we're seeing that caregiving can happen across the lifespan. It can certainly be, parents caring for a child of a disability, with a disability. It can be someone caring for a spouse. It could be somebody caring for a parent. And so, we're here for all caregivers in all caregiving situations. And certainly the needs and interests of older adults, both as caregivers and care recipients, are really important. And we're having a lot of conversations right now about aging in place.
Hmm. Now, we just need to clarify that when you're talking about caregivers, these are people who are providing support, care, doing all of the, medical appointment arranging, navigating all of the healthcare needs of their loved ones, but they're not paid to do this.
That's right. So we're really talking about people who are caring for a family member, friend, neighbor, someone with whom they have a personal relationship. And yes, it can certainly include the kinds of things that you've talked about around scheduling appointments or going to appointments. It can certainly involve a wide range of activities around acts of daily living, and it can also really evolve over time. So as someone's care needs change, that caregiving relationship may evolve too. For some people, it might be an hour or two a week, and then we have other caregivers where it's more than 10 or 20, 30 or 40 or full-time 24/7 care for someone. So, what I can say from my own experience and certainly talking with caregivers across the province is, caregiving is not a linear path. It's not always a predictable path. And so it really can evolve based on the circumstances and the needs of the person that you're caring for.
Yeah, it's interesting. I often give talks to different groups and about the chat services. And um, one of the things that happens is I will walk into a group that are younger people and say in their 30s, 40s, and they sort of look at me quizzically like, why are you coming in to talk about aging in the community and about supports for seniors? And, you know, that's nowhere near sort of our frame of reference right now. So I often will ask them, are you or anybody that you know, maybe your parents are involved in caring for a loved one? And then suddenly they start to click into what I'm talking about in terms of some of the issues and challenges. And we hear a lot about the sandwich generation. I was hearing that term 20 years ago, 30 years ago, but I think even more so now, where we have mostly women, right? Who are still working, but they have to care for, children, even grown children have their own demands. We often hear the phrase "bigger kids, bigger problems," but caring for their children and now having to care for their parents. And as people are living longer, that span of time that somebody may need help from a caregiver is growing longer. Is that something that your organization supports people with, and how might you do that?
So, I mean, you've touched on so many important issues. I'll just chime in on the sandwich generation being one of them, right? Where I still have school age kids at home, and I'm also the primary caregiver for my dad as a part of a circle of care. And there are a lot of pressures, in particular for working caregivers, where you're balancing work, care, potentially multiple caregiving relationships, other commitments in your life, whether that's children, community, etc. And so we certainly are hearing from caregivers through things like our annual spotlight report that the pressures are growing, and we can talk a little bit more about that. But in terms of your question, what are we doing with and for caregivers? One of the things that we've tried to do since the formation of this organization is have different points of entry and different options for different people based on their needs and their circumstances. So somebody might come and watch a webinar and get information on a very specific topic that they need. Somebody else might want a peer mentor who's maybe followed a similar journey to them, who can talk with them around problem solving and navigating some of the challenges that they may face. Or there may be caregivers who need more support in terms of, say, a coach to create a caregiving plan with them that they can use to sustain their caregiving commitment going forward. And some people need counseling, which we also offer to caregivers to deal with the wide range of emotions and things that might arise for them in their caregiving experience. So, a great thing if people are hearing this and they're wondering where to start is they can visit our website at ontariocaregiver.ca, or they can call our 24/7 helpline and talk to somebody about what's going on for them and what they might need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very helpful advice. And of course, Chats also has support for caregivers. One of the areas that we're seeing increasingly is that caregivers need to feel confident and prepared to bring their loved ones home from the hospital. We're involved in a number of hospital to home programs with our hospital partners, and we found that it's not just enough to prepare the patient who is being discharged to go back home, but we need to ensure that the caregiver is feeling comfortable and confident. So we work with the caregiver in providing them support to bring their loved one back home, and knowing that there's help for them, and they're not going to be alone and have to deal with whatever issues may arise post hospital discharge. Chats also has a number of other caregiver education and support programs that we're running, and of course respite care through things like our adult day programs, and we do have a respite care service where PSWs will go into the home and provide support. But it's just so crucial, really, to ensure that we're identifying and recognizing that the caregiver is very much a partner with the older adult or person with disability or whatever, and we need to recognize that.
I totally agree with you. We've been doing some work, particularly on highlighting the role of caregiver as an essential partner in care for about a year and a half now. And we started working with hospital and long-term care partners, and we're now working with home care and primary care partners as well. And it touches on so many of the things that you've just highlighted in terms of, first of all, making sure that caregivers are identified. Many people don't self-identify as a caregiver. They say, I'm a son, I'm a daughter, I'm a spouse, whatever the role may be in their relationship, but they might not see that what they're doing is caregiving. And so there's an important thing that happens when people recognize themselves and are recognized as a caregiver, as a part of that care team. And then if they are engaged in the ways that you're talking about, as a part of the care team, that's so important. And particularly with transitions, which you highlighted a minute ago, we hear regularly from caregivers where there may be a transition plan that they weren't engaged in the planning process, but they will be expected to probably do a significant amount of tasks, organizing, etc., as a part of the outcome of that transition plan. And so when we recognize caregivers as a part of the care team at all stages of that journey, then we really see that they're on the continuum the whole way along, and there may be multiple people in that circle of care, or the caregiving needs may ebb and flow, but they are often the constant through that journey. And then the last piece is connecting caregivers with support from organizations like yours, organizations like ours. And this is why I think things like cross referrals are so important, because we want to make sure that people have what they need in the community. I think it's so important that people are really connected to services like respite, which is one of the top
Mm-hmm.
3 requests that we get from caregivers is, how do I get respite at all, or how do I get more of it? And then how are they connected with the support that they need for themselves as a caregiver, right? Through things like you highlighted, info sessions and so much more.
Mm-hmm. We have interviewed people from the federal government as well as regional government to talk about some of the programs and policies and so forth that the different levels of government have. What are some of the things that your organization is advocating for on behalf of caregivers, both at the federal level and provincial?
Well, one of the things that I'm most excited about is the prospect of a national caregiving strategy. This is something that our colleagues at the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence are working on, informing the development of that strategy with the federal government. And I think that provides an opportunity for there to be more consistent resources and supports for caregivers across the country. I do think right now there is more attention on caregiving than we've ever seen before. It's part of the dialogue, not just in health and social care, but maybe in our society more than it ever has been. And I hope that that will continue, because when we look at things like just the changing demographics and the number of older adults who may need a caregiver as they move through their own life cycle. But also, if we look at the predictions around our overall health and wellness as a society, I think we know that caregiving is going to be such an important issue for all of us as we move forward, and that's why we've got to take care of caregivers. So that's really our focus provincially, is making sure that we have the programs and services and supports in place that caregivers need, regardless of their caregiving circumstances. Because, you know, I've had 3 different caregiving experiences in my life. All 3 have been very different. And so I often say, you know, there's 4 million caregivers, there's 4 million different caregiving experiences that people are having. And it means we've got to be ready to support and meet the needs of everyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what might a national strategy include for supporting caregivers?
Well, the honest answer is we don't know yet. It's pretty early days, and this is one of the things that the CCCE is really doing, is gathering information from organizations like ours, organizations who are focused on different chronic conditions, that kind of thing, and looking at what are the recommendations that might go forward to be included. But we certainly hope that it might include financial support for caregivers. It might include more consistent availability of supports across the country for caregivers, that it will also include connections in with health and social services to really integrate caregivers as a part of those pathways. And then, you know, another big theme that's coming up in my work right now is breaking down some of these silos, so that when we talk about aging well at home, that we actually have integration of that care and integration with caregivers and across providers, across teams. And so I guess my bigger dream is that things like that strategy and things like the work that are happening around integrated care will really give us the opportunity to support individuals as whole people, not just the person receiving the care, but in this case also the caregiver, right? And find ways to make these solutions work so that they can be successful in their caregiving commitments, but also at work or as a parent or whatever other commitments they have in their life.
Right.
So, you know, I think it requires a lot of conversation and requires some change in terms of how we approach our work together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We unfortunately hear examples of situations where caregivers are, at their wits' end. They're burnt out. They're overwhelmed, particularly with dementia. If they have a parent or a spouse or a neighbor, whatever. And the reality is, we just don't have enough health human resources to take care of everybody. And so a lot of that burden, and I shouldn't even call it burden. I mean, maybe that's part of our dilemma, is we're seeing caregiving as a burden, but with the proper supports, it shouldn't have to be a burden, but something that people are able to do and manage and cope with. Because we just don't have enough, staff to be able to send in homes and sit with somebody 24/7. And that's the reality. We don't have enough long-term care beds, and you know, ideally, we're going to avoid institutionalization of older adults, because there is no other, support or resource available in the community.
Well, we know that caregivers provide 3/4 of the care that an individual is receiving, and that's regardless of whether they're receiving that at home or inpatient at the hospital or even in long-term care, or any combination of those things over the course of an individual's journey. And so we also know that when there are challenges on the health human resource side, the person who's stepping in is usually the caregiver, right? So they're feeling the strain of that HHR crisis directly. And we hear about that from caregivers all the time. You highlighted burnout. We have watched that number go up year after year in our Spotlight report. And it is really concerning because when caregivers are burnt out, there are two major risks. One, they'll become a patient themselves, right?
Yes.
It'll
Yeah.
affect their own health and wellness, which we are really concerned about, but also that it can affect the health and wellness of the person that they care for. And you're right that some of these more high intensivity caregiving situations, like dementia care, are instances where we see that. So this is where supports and resources, practical solutions, the things that caregivers need, become so important.
Yeah. You mentioned that you became a caregiver to your brother at a younger age and have experienced the challenges there. I imagine, going to school and keeping up with your own life story. And that's something that we're hearing and seeing more of, is that there are younger adults that are becoming caregivers, particularly for parents who have either young onset dementias or what we can call age-related conditions like MS or Parkinson's and so forth. Have you got, like, specific programs for them, or what's the situation like for younger adults in that position?
I think that the considerations for young caregivers are different because what we know is that it really can affect the trajectory of their life, right? It can
Mhm.
inform their education and employment choices or even opportunities. It can affect their social life. It has such an impact on young caregivers when their choices are being informed by their caregiving commitments. And so we do have a number of resources for caregivers. We have our Young Caregivers Connect that young caregivers can visit online. We have young caregiver support groups and online connection points for them. And then there are also dedicated organizations. The Young Caregivers Association also has resources and supports for young caregivers. So if people know a young caregiver in their life, I would strongly recommend recognizing them as a caregiver, coming back to that very simple starting point, and then connecting them with their peers and resources, for folks who may be going through something that's very similar, so that they don't have to feel alone in that journey. And I do think that that's a common feature for caregivers, regardless of your age, is caregiving can be really lonely. And one of the things that every caregiver wants or needs or is glad they get when they have it is that feeling of not being alone and having someone to be there for them and with them along that journey.
Mhm. In preparation for this podcast, Amy, I did have a look at your website and some of the YouTube videos that are available, and there's a video that OCO has. I think you call it your open house video, and some testimonials from some of the clients that you work with, and truly inspirational in the sense of how people have come to your organization feeling that despair, but being able to connect with others who are going through similar lived experience, and having a coach and so forth has made a tremendous difference to their ability to be able to continue to give that care. So I think kudos to your organization for providing that support and recognition. So important. And I think, you mentioned as well that we need to give voice to caregivers in policy discussion, in discussions with governments around funding resources, and acknowledging that this is sort of an untapped, maybe I shouldn't say untapped because it's very tapped into. I was going to say an unrecognized labor market that supports healthcare delivery in ways that we can only begin to estimate.
You talked about caregiver voice. I think that is immensely important. It's one of the priority areas in our strategic plan in terms of amplifying caregiver voices and making sure that the right people are hearing about caregivers' lived experience and that caregivers are actively involved in the formation of policy, evolution of practice, and that's happening at every level. And we do see this increasingly with healthcare providers, Ontario health teams, work that's happening at the provincial level where caregivers are being engaged. And our hope is that we can have caregivers engaged early, often, and ongoing, right? Because we want to make sure that caregivers who will be moving through all of these systems and processes can really help inform the best case scenarios for everybody, and that they deserve to have a seat at the table when that planning is happening and when we're testing things for implementation.
Hmm. Very much so. And something that CHATS does through its own advocacy efforts at the provincial and federal levels. You know, we also talk about the caregivers. As I said, we have programs as well to support them because it's part of the success strategy, I think, for clients to be able to achieve their goals, and the clients often include the caregivers as part of that care team. So really, really important. Where do you think things will go in the future with
I
an
think
aging population and the health human resource challenge that we're facing?
I really am hopeful, based on the conversations that we're having right now, that a few important things will happen. One, that we will recognize that we can no longer treat the types of supports that have been very separate and isolated as separate and isolated anymore. I think we're going to have to look at the interconnectedness of those supports and services and look at those community-based kind of models. So I think there's some good conversations happening about that, and I hope that that turns into material widespread change within the system for folks. I also am hopeful that we will recognize that there are a number of enabling factors for people to age well at home. And one of them is support for caregivers. So we must continue to invest in that so that caregivers have the help that they need and don't reach that burnout point. But we also have to really make the vision of aging well at home align with the practical implementation and support, because it being a good idea doesn't actually make it happen in people's lived experience. And we really need to think about what are all of the nodal points, right? All of the things that have to work in order for someone to be able to age well at home. So those conversations are happening, and we really need to look at crystallizing those linkages in a way that it works for somebody in their lived experience. And then the other thing that I'm thinking about in terms of the future is that we have a different awareness and perception of caregiving going forward.
Hmm.
Caregiving has really been one of those things that's been quiet or in the background. And, you might not even realize that your neighbor is a caregiver, your family is a caregiver, you're a caregiver. And so I think as we recognize the importance of caregivers in our society, there's more that we can do. And we can look to countries like the UK to say, okay, what are some of the strategies that really make life easier for caregivers that we can implement wide scale here, and recognize what an important role caregivers are playing in our society.
Hmm. So starting at the most local level of action, what might I do to support my neighbors who are caregivers, or maybe I don't even realize that they're caregivers, but they need support? What are some of the things that we could do at that neighborhood level?
We did a campaign last year called the Undercover Kindness Campaign. And one of the things that we were encouraging people to do was recognize people like their neighbors or family members in their life who were caregiving and do something for them. It could be bringing them a cup of coffee. It could be shoveling their walk when you're shoveling yours. So these can be simple things that can be a way of saying, I recognize that you're doing this and I'm here to help. So that's one thing that I would recommend people consider is for the caregivers is there something simple that you can do? It may be one time, it may be ongoing, that would make their life a little bit easier. And then the other thing that I would recommend is to make sure that they are aware of the resources and supports that are out there from organizations like CHATS and OCO, because sometimes there are people out there doing really ongoing caregiving work in their life, and they may not be connected to all of the resources that are available to them. And so, we've certainly received phone calls, as you may have too, from folks where they say, I didn't know about you, and then my neighbor brought me the
Yes.
information. And
Yes.
so I think that that's another way that we can really support the caregivers in our lives.
Great advice. Amy, this time has gone so fast and it's been so informative for me and also I think a little bit cathartic to hear that there is an organization like the Ontario Caregiver Organization to provide so much support to caregivers who are a vital resource and really a crucial part of the aging and community and being able to age successfully. So I thank you for your time. If you want to just give us information on how we can contact you, would really appreciate that.
Great. The best way to connect with us is to go to our website at ontariocaregiver.ca. You can learn about all of our free programs and services there, as well as our 24/7 helpline, which of course is also free. So those are great ways to connect with us. You can also follow us on social, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, etc., where you can learn more about events that are happening. We actually have another open house coming up. You referred to one of our previous ones. We always have webinars, info sessions, things that we'll be sharing, reports that we've issued. So connect with us on social as well to learn more about what's new and coming up.
Amy, we thank you. And I thank all of you for joining us for this episode of Let's Talk About Aging in the Community from CHATS Community and Home Assistance. And until next time, be well.